Hi, everybody. I'm Disco Funcussion, aka Jennifer Carr. I'm with Rose City Rollers. I'm on the board of directors. And my partner, Witch, and I are going to be talking about unemployment in a post-COVID world today. In my everyday life, I am a continuous improvement consultant. And what that basically means in a nutshell is I help people solve problems. So one of the problems that people find is employment insecurity and really not liking their jobs so much. And I just have a passion for this stuff. And I'm really excited to share with you the content that Witch and I have today. So Witch, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Witch Slap or Maggie. I've been a wrecker for about 2.5 years, and as of last Friday, I am in the same boat as many of you because I have been permanently laid off from my job. So I will also be needing to find a new job at the end of this pandemic. In my spare time and most of my time now that I've been laid off, I'm a resume editor and designer. So I've helped a lot of wreckers edit and refine their job search materials and helped a lot of you find jobs and get interviews for great jobs. And last week I launched that as a professional service called Seagoat Edits. So I love resume editing and designing. I've been doing it for a few years and I'm looking forward to sharing what I've learned with you all.
So great. So before we get started, just I want to kind of ground you on what you're going to be seeing today. First of all, this is a re-taping and a rebroadcast because we had some audio quality issues when we were doing it last night live. So you'll hear the questions that were asked at the end of this. So we'll still try to replicate what we had, but hopefully this will be a cleaner copy for you if you were on last night. And also, this is not a presentation about entrepreneurialism or starting your own gig or even going into the gig economy. This really is more about directly about applying for jobs that are in existing companies, existing nonprofits that are either being advertised or maybe you can find open positions in ones that aren't advertised, but it's kind of more of the traditional job hunting path, just so we're all grounded on that. Okay. So we have a lot of content to get through today, so I'm going to go and share my screen. So hold, please, while I bring up my deck. All right, so as I said, we're really talking about employment in a post-COVID world. This whole deck here is all about, here we go. This whole presentation here is really about, now that the economy has really shifted in this post-COVID environment that we're in, and all of us are still kind of waking up and trying to figure out, what our next steps will be, whether we're currently employed or whether we are on furlough, hoping to go back to our previous jobs, or whether we've been permanently unemployed. The entire workplace and economy has really just shaken the snow globe, right? Everyone is now have exited their previous seats and will likely have an opportunity to either find new positions, might be required to find new positions because your previous position had been eliminated, and maybe be able to take the opportunity to really kind of investigate and do a deep dive on yourself to figure out what it is you really love to do so that you're not going back into a job just for job's sake, that you're really thinking thoughtfully about what your next step in your career will be. And hopefully the presentation and the material that we're going to share with you is going to really kind of drive home how you can really take that next step in your professional life. But for those of you who are still employed, or even those non-employed folks, in pre-COVID, before this all happened, I know a lot of you were really dissatisfied with your work life anyways. You probably weren't getting the pay that you wanted. You probably weren't doing the work that really kind of fed your soul. And you needed a better job anyways. So this is also a speech that we could give even if people weren't so unemployed in the positions that they are right now. So really, we're looking at our target for today is to give you practical tips and strategies to really help you navigate your next steps to find a job that you really love. So before we start talking about what you can do, it's helpful to know what job owners and hiring managers are looking for. So we put together this little vignette here about what the other side might be thinking and a view from the other side of the table. So when you're listening to, or you're looking at hiring committees, you're confronting hiring committees either through the job application process or through interviews process, you have to remember that everyone who's evaluating the job applicants that are coming across, they're getting a huge volume of applicants, many of which could do this position that they have open, and they only have 1 or 2 slots available, if that. So, you know, you're confronting a group of people who have a lot of expertise, certainly on their side. They have a lot of opinions about what they want in their next candidate that they're going to be putting in those slots. But they also have you know, emotions, and they have opinions about things. And oftentimes hiring committees will disagree with each other. Somebody's top candidate might be somebody's sort of middle candidate. And all you really have to think about when you're going into a hiring manager or hiring committee position is to remember that your job really is just to make it easy for them to say yes to you, so that you, you know, you shine in your best light, and just kind of let the chips fall where they may. Again, there's going to be candidates out there that are going to be better fits for any particular position, or a better for the org culture, or for other team members. There might be some difficult team members that they have in their own organizations that they're looking to see if they can find a candidate who will match with their team and with their mission. So, you know, what we are hoping to do today is just to give you lots of information to make you feel confident going into that hiring process. And again, to make it really easy for them to say yes to you as a candidate. So before we start talking about what you can do, you've got to begin with the end in mind. And when we put this out into our Reckers forum a few weeks ago and said, hey, what do you guys want to hear about when you're talking about unemployment or job searching? One of the things that we heard from quite a few of you was, can you help me decide what to be when I grow up? And the answer to that is clearly no. We can't decide that for you. You have to decide that. But there are some tactics that you can do in order to help refine what that is for your own self. You certainly can look at personality tests. You've got Skills Finder is a really popular one. It's a book that you can purchase, and it gives you a whole quiz, and it helps you, you know, identify what your strengths are. But I like this model that I have in front of you here called Head, Hearts, and Hands. It really helps to put a more practical spin on what it is that you really, what feeds your passion, and how it is that you want your work day to be structured. So looking at the head column there, we've got, it's all about the practical stuff, right? It's all about how much you need to get paid, what kind of benefits you are expecting to get out of a position, what kind of work hours you want to work, if you want to work days, if you want to work swing, if you are a weekender, you like that kind of work, what kind of work environment you're interested in working in, and whether or not you have commuting requirements, if you don't want to commute too far away from home, if you are okay with, you know, going on 20 or 30% travel for the job. Getting that column that's all the practical stuff about what you need to have in a job is one of those steps. The second step really is all about the passion. It's the heart, right? It's what are you really truly passionate about? What kind of organizations do you want to work with? What kind of populations do you want to work with? Does an organization's mission matter to you? Or is it more important to you what you're doing every day rather than who you're doing it with? Sometimes I like to identify what I like in terms of what I don't like, because it helps me kind of clarify a little bit more about what it is that I don't want, and then the remaining stuff is really what I'm okay with or what I'm passionate about. So, you know, clarify the types of people or causes or organizations that you don't want to work with helps you really start to frame out what your passion is and what you really want to, what kind of organizations you want to work with. And then the last column here is all about the hands, and the hands is all about the productivity that you're going to be doing during the day. So how you would like to spend your days. Do you like making things with your hands? Do you like being up on your feet and walking around and being really physically active? Do you like sitting by yourself and researching and learning new things? Are you a collaborative worker? Are you a solo kind of worker? Do you like serving others, or do you really like to train people? Those kinds of things about what it is you really want to be doing every day when you walk into to your job when your shift starts is going to help you sort of, again, kind of clarify what kind of jobs you should be looking for. So after you've kind of figured out what it is that you want to do, or at least what you don't want to do, so you know not to apply for those jobs, you start to have to think about the strategy in your job search. So we've got a couple of tips and tricks here for both unemployed and still employed people. Focusing first on the unemployed folks, people will tell you that your job search as an unemployed person should be your sole job for 40 hours a week, right? And I'm here to tell you, after the last 6 or 7 years, I've had 2 stints of unemployment myself. It is exhausting to try to apply for jobs for 8 hours straight, 5 days a week. When you first get unemployed, you kind of have a lot of burst of energy and you can do this and you're really passionate about it. But what's going to happen is, first of all, you're going to run out of opportunities because you're going to have applied for everything that you can find. And secondly, you're going to start getting a little bit depressed and a little demoralized because you're putting out a lot of effort hoping that you're going to hear back from somebody in the next few days. And it might be several weeks before you start hearing back from companies for first interviews. And waiting that time when you're putting out a lot of energy into the world is really tiring. So I recommend job hunting no more than 2 to 4 hours a day at the maximum, and then using the rest of your time for kind of self-care and self-improvement. So eating regular meals, sleeping regular nights, taking walks, getting your regular exercise that you normally would, and also using the time to really dive into topics that you're, a little bit uncomfortable with, or maybe need more exposure to. So listening to nerdy podcasts is one of my favorite things to do, because there's a lot about the world that I don't know. There's a lot of industries that I know nothing about. And so sometimes I just like to listen to other people talk about their work through a podcast, like Ologies with Ali Ward, or Stuff You Should Know. Those are kind of like high level, sort of scraping the surface of what other people do, or what other kinds of industries or jobs there might be out in the world. And it helps me get more understanding of what opportunities there might be, kind of opens up my mind a little bit, and also keeps my brain juices going too, so that I don't get in a rut of sitting on the couch and watching the same reruns of old television shows that I've seen. Just keeping yourself a little bit more intellectually capable or active really helps to kind of open your mind up to different kinds of opportunities. The other thing that does, when you expose yourself to new information, is it really helps you be a better conversationalist, because you will be meeting new people in the days and weeks to come, whether it's through interviews or through networking or something. And being exposed to different types of information helps you just have better conversations and more meaningful conversations with people that you meet. So it's really good. For the still employed, start searching before you need that job. Do not wait until you're unemployed. Do not wait until you're at threat of getting furloughed. Start doing your networking now. We'll talk about networking in a few slides. But again, learn new things, learn more about the industries that you're interested in. Take some online classes if you want to. Certainly cultivate a professional mentor if you have an opportunity to. All of those things, when you're still employed, are really great to do, because you already have the opportunity to be around a bunch of people that are like-minded and maybe looking for other new opportunities as well. So Richard, do you want to talk about red flags?
Yeah, so let's go over a few things that might be red flags in a job search. And these would be reasons you might want to turn down a job, or reasons why you might pay close attention to when you're searching a job. So the first thing we talked about is slow communication. If the hiring committee is really slow to respond, a lot slower to respond than they said they'd be, something to watch out for. And we'll talk about this a little bit more at the end of our presentation, because we had a question about it last night, but someone brought up that City of Portland jobs are really slow to respond, and that hiring process is really slow. And that's not necessarily a red flag if it's specific to the industry, but we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Unenthusiastic employees, we're also going to talk about questions to ask in an interview. Ask the employees who are interviewing you why they like working for that company, and pay close attention to their tone and their body language, because that will really inform how the employees feel about the company and how they feel they're treated. And then a demanding interview process. For a lot of jobs, and again, like the city of Portland or a bureaucratic job like that might be an exception, but for a lot of jobs, more than like 3 interviews is usually overkill. So if they're making you jump through a lot of hoops for a position, that may not be something you want to go through. Accepting a job out of desperation is usually a bad idea. So if you're so desperate to get out of your current job, you just take the first job opportunity that comes up. I promise you that like all of you are really smart and strong and capable, and you will find a job that's good enough for you and a job that deserves you if you're persistent enough. So don't take the first job, even if you get a weird feeling about it, just to get out of your current situation. I have done that before and it really sucks. It's not worth it. And then bad vibes, like trust your instincts in the hiring process. Your instincts are usually right about something. So if you get a weird feeling at any point while you're searching for jobs, that's something to pay attention to. As an example, I was once involved in a job search and had a hiring manager call to offer me a job. And I asked her for a little bit of time to look over the benefits package before I accepted. And the hiring manager seemed like very deeply personally offended that I didn't just accept the job on the spot, when taking time to look over the benefits package before you accept an offer is a very normal and acceptable thing to do. So that gave me a little bit of a weird vibe. An example of something to watch out for. So when we talk about job searching and where to look for a job, there are a lot of different resources to go to. There are job boards like Indeed and LinkedIn and Glassdoor. I especially like using Glassdoor because that's a platform where employees can anonymously review their employer. So if you check Glassdoor and the company has like a lot of negative reviews or a lot of reviews saying the same thing, that's also a red flag to keep an eye out for. I have been involved in nonprofits my whole professional career, and so I look for industry-specific job boards. So like I have been involved in arts administration in the past, so I'll look at job boards like the Regional Arts and Culture Council, things like that. So look for job boards that are specific to your industry as well. Best places to work lists. It's becoming very normal these days for companies to want to have a reputation of being a good place to work. So a lot of publications are compiling lists and ranking companies based on how good they are to the employees and coming up with best place to work lists. That's a great place to search. And then you can also go straight to the source. So if you know about a company or you know about an organization whose work that you enjoy and they have a good reputation, go straight to their website. They'll probably have an employment or a work with us or a careers section, and you can check there, and they should have all the current job postings listed there.
And then everyone wants to know about networking. So let's talk about that next. So networking. Many of you may have the impression that networking is going to a big publicized networking event, taking some business cards with you, maybe taking some resumes with you, and talking to people with a cocktail in your hands and passing out your business cards and trading business cards with people. That is absolutely one type of networking that you can do. I'll say from my own experience, I've been a member of the Better Business Bureau of 2 different cities, go to those networking events often. What I often find is people that are looking to drum up business for themselves, which is fine. It's really great. It's exposure, but they're not necessarily hiring. They're usually trying to build their businesses, or they are job seekers themselves. So they're usually less successful than building the relationships with the people that you have. So, so networking in general is a fancy word for really building relationships. And what you're looking for is to build to meet people who are who have information about positions or industries or types of work that you might be interested in. And even if you're not that interested in that work after speaking with them, or even before speaking with them, it's a connection that you're making that can help perhaps introduce you to another person that might get you closer to that job that you want. So if you think about networking as simply building relationships with people, I think it brings a little bit more ease into the idea of networking. The best time to network is when you don't need your network. really, if you're still employed, you should probably start looking at opportunities to meet new people and interview them about what they do and what kind of interests they have and what kind of industries they're in. Do that now before you need that network, because once you become unemployed, it just becomes that much harder. You're already separated from other people. We're already socially isolated, so that's hard. But when you're not in a workplace and kind of just doing those, traditional water cooler type chats, it just separates you further from people that you might need to know. So it's not saying that it's impossible to network when you don't have a job right now and you're looking for a position. It's just makes it a little bit more complex. Develop your networking style. So there's lots of different networking styles out there. For your extroverts, you're probably really good at going up to strangers and just asking them a bunch of questions and, sort of probing them for information, and you're really comfortable with that, go with it. Extroverts are great at networking. If you're more of an introvert that is less comfortable for you to just call up a stranger, I'd really encourage you to read. In fact, I encourage everybody to read this article that I have posted. You can find it on the internet if this, just by typing in this address. But it is 6 Degrees of Lois Weisberg. And it is an old article that came out like 20 years ago, but it still keeps getting brought up when we talk about networking in classes about networking, because it really highlights the importance of having your network be broad enough in different types of circles. So without getting too much into the actual content of the article itself, it describes a woman who is really what we call a connector, because they travel in social circles that are with a bunch of lawyers and a bunch of politicians, but they also have circles of friends that are artists and people that garden in the community parks and people that are involved in the farmers market community. And because that person has so many people that they know, they end up being a connector for other people. And it makes that person a really valuable resource to be and also to know. And helping to find those connectors is really an important part of networking. The next sort of rule on here about networking is really don't ask directly for an interview or for a job. What you're doing in networking, again, is building that relationship with a new person that you've never met and just learning more about them, learning about what their interests are, learning about why they got into the work that they've done, asking their advice on where they can learn more about a certain topic that piqued your interest. That's really the spirit of networking, is just talking to people, relating with them, sharing information about you and getting information about them, so that they can know who you are and what you're looking for and what your interests are, and you can learn more about and start crafting more about what your interests are as well. And then lastly, I have on here, be the network you want to see in the world. Networking is not just a take, it's a give as well. So you may have just left a job that you don't like at all, or a type of work that you don't like at all, but it might be somebody else's dream job. Be the network for somebody else. Offer your information and your industry experience to somebody else so that they can learn more about what you just did, and you can start giving back to the networking community. I've got a list of questions on here that's really your homework for this as well, is, who do you know? What are the things that you are most interested in learning about? Who can you talk to that knows about those interests, and what can you offer to somebody else? So your homework is to really think about those questions and really start putting those down on paper so that you can start crafting who it is that you might need to reach out to.
All right, so we're going to talk a little bit now about the differences between some common job application materials. So a resume, a CV, and a cover letter. A resume is a bulleted list of your past job experiences, duties, and accomplishments. It should include the basic sections. In addition to your job experience, that it includes are your contact information, your education, and any volunteer experience. And this next point I'm going to say like several times throughout this presentation because I want everyone to remember it. Your resume should tell a story about your successes and your accomplishments rather than just listing the actual job duties you performed. And I'll talk more about how to write those bullet points in a couple slides. A CV, it stands for curriculum vitae, or the course of my life in Latin. And that's a combination of a resume and your educational accomplishments. So it's usually used for things like careers in academia, science, and medicine. And it's a detailed list of your job experience, but also your things like research and teaching experience, published peer-reviewed works, especially if you're in like a scientific field, certifications, licenses, professional affiliations, theses, graduate coursework, things like that. You'll probably use a CV if you're applying for like a career in academia or a teaching position, something like that. And then a cover letter is a job specific letter. It almost always accompanies a resume or a CV. And it should be a formal letter specific to the job that you're applying for. So you don't want to use the same cover letter for every single job you apply for. You can use the same like basic template and change things about it to make it specific to the job, but avoid using the same cover letter. It's not just a restatement of your resume, and it should explain why you are a good fit for the job, why the company should hire you, and what you would bring to the position. A cover letter also serves as a writing sample, so it shows that you can use like basic grammar and syntax properly and craft a well-written letter. So a good cover letter writer will never just like write you a cover letter from scratch. They'll ask you to have a rough draft that they can work from. Okay, and now we're going to talk a little bit about resume writing. And before I get into this, I just want to preface this by saying that the things I'm going to share with you in the next couple slides are things that I've found work for me and work for the people who I have helped with their resumes. They are by no means the only way to do things, and people might disagree with some of what I say or some of my strategies, and that's fine. There's a lot of different opinions about this, and that's okay. So I have my resume on the screen here, and we'll go through the sections in a second and break each one down a little bit. So your resume should be one page unless you have a really long career, and we're talking like 10 years or more most likely, and it should be 2 pages maximum, so avoid going over 2 pages. Next, first you'll see a header. I use the same header for my cover letter and my resume to create like brand cohesion, and all it needs is your name and your contact information. Next, you'll see your experience sections. So these are jobs that you were paid for and relevant internships. And these entries should include the company name, the position that you held or positions, if you had multiple positions there, the dates that you worked there, and bullet points about your successes and accomplishments and your responsibilities. Again, I'll talk more about those in the next slide. Next, your education. You can keep this one simple. All you need to list is your school, your degree, and your graduation year. You don't usually need things like your GPA or your extracurriculars unless they were relevant to the job that you're applying for. If you have multiple degrees, list all of them. If you only have a high school degree, that's totally fine. You can list your high school diploma. And if you don't have a high school degree, that is still fine. I would recommend probably just leaving the education section off if you don't have a high school diploma. Next is the volunteerism section. This is a great thing to include if you have space for it and you do volunteer work. A volunteerism section shows that you have a commitment to giving back to your community and growing your community. And I'm guessing a lot of you are also involved with roller derby in some capacity, and roller derby is a great thing to put in the volunteerism section of a resume because it is unique and they will probably remember you as like the roller derby candidate. And then I have this skills section with an asterisk by it. You'll notice I don't have a skills section on my resume. That's because I generally recommend not using a skills section on your resume unless it's standard for your industry. So for example, I worked on a resume last week for a client who was a computer engineer, a software engineer. And a skills section was really important for his resume because he needed to list all of the programming languages he was proficient in. But a lot of people I notice will put a skills section and just have things on it like Microsoft Office or good communicator or customer service. And something like Microsoft Office, like unfortunately, it's not that impressive that you can use Microsoft Office because most people are proficient with that these days. And then things like I'm a good communicator and I have good customer service are things I would recommend building into the bullet points rather than listing them in a separate section. So unless it's standard for your industry, I would generally recommend not using a skills section because it takes up valuable space and it can be redundant. You'll also notice on the slide here, I have a summary section with an asterisk. Summaries are something I don't usually think you need unless you do have a really long resume, because if your resume is like 2 pages because you had a really long career and it's filled with a lot of detailed information, a hiring manager might not have time to read your entire resume. So a summary can be helpful when a hiring manager is just flipping through to decide whether or not they're going to take a closer look at your resume. Next, let's talk about a few things you might not need on your resume. An objective section I usually think is kind of pointless because obviously your objective is to get the job that you're applying for. And if your objective says things like the kind of environment you want to work in, that's information that can go in your cover letter. If we talked about summaries already, and if you really want an objective section, maybe think about replacing it with a summary section instead. You don't need a physical address and location these days because we don't do job applications by mail anymore. And the fact that you're applying to this job indicates, the fact that you are applying to this job indicates that you are willing to relocate if necessary. So if you're located in Portland and you're applying to a job in Massachusetts, it implies that you're willing to relocate to Massachusetts if you have to. So you don't have to clarify that you live in Portland. And then you don't need to have references on your resume. You also don't need to say references available upon request. Calling your references is something that almost always happens very close to the end of the hiring process. And it's usually if they are pretty sure they want to hire you, or maybe it's between you and one other candidate. So it's totally normal in all industries for the hiring committee to ask you for your references when they want them. So some places will ask you to submit them on an application when you first apply for the job, but a lot of places will ask you for your references once they get to that step. And then if you're ever just in doubt about whether or not you should put something on your resume, ask yourself if it's relevant to the job that you're applying for. So like I was a waitress in college and I don't have that on my resume because it's not really relevant to applying for event planning jobs. So ask yourself if it's relevant and if it would be helpful and if it would serve your resume. Okay, so here's an example. I want to talk a little bit more about these bullet points. How do I write about my job? So this is an example of a bullet point that I've seen some iteration of a lot on resumes. It just says, ran front desk, answered phones. This bullet point doesn't really tell me anything about how you were successful and like what you accomplished in your job. So it doesn't really sound that impressive to me. This is how I would rewrite that bullet point if I were editing your resume. I'd probably say something like, expertly managed high traffic front desk that saw over 50 daily customers, successfully fielded up to 30 calls per day, answering queries and solving problems with professional tact. So this rewrite works really well for a few reasons. It uses eye-catching adverbs like expertly and successfully. It uses numbers. I would recommend putting as many numbers as you can in your bullet points because numbers are quantifiable proof that you were good at your job. And then this bullet point also talks about how you were successful, not just the duties that you completed. I've said this a few times already, but your resume bullet points should really tell a story about what you brought to the company and how you helped the company, not just that you did the duties you were asked to perform. All right, so let's talk a little bit about writing cover letters next. A format that I find usually works really well for cover letters is just a basic 3-paragraph format. The first paragraph you can use to introduce yourself and mention the position you're applying for by name. And then I would talk a little bit about how you would help the company. They usually have something about the company's goals for this position in the job posting, so you can directly address that and how you would help those goals. And then you can talk about any relevant skills that you might have. Paragraph 2 should be a specific example of a challenge or that you overcame or a problem that you solved. This works really well for a few reasons. It shows that you can recognize a problem, that you can take initiative to decide you're going to solve the problem, to come up with a solution and successfully execute the solution in a way that benefits the company. So for example, when I was in college, I worked in the music library and we had a huge multimedia section that was filled with like really outdated old multimedia. We're talking like older than VHS tapes, and they were all like falling apart and nobody could check them out or use them because there weren't even materials to view them with anymore. So I recognized that this was a problem and I took initiative and decided I was going to catalog every single one of these outdated multimedia materials. I cataloged each one and I did research on whether or not they existed on newer formats. And if they did exist in newer formats, what the purchasing options were so that they could be repurchased in formats that people would actually use. And I made a huge spreadsheet that cataloged all this information, and it's a spreadsheet that that library still uses today when they're pursuing purchasing options for these newer materials. So, and I made it like, I think it was like 6 or 7 years ago that I did that project. So this example shows that I recognized the problem, that we had all this outdated material. I took initiative and decided I was going to fix it. I came up with a plan of cataloging all this material, and I successfully solved it and helped the company because they still use that log today. And then the third paragraph is another place for you to address some skills. You can list any or talk about any additional relevant experience. I find that volunteer work that might be relevant to the job position is a great thing to put in this paragraph. Talk about some specific skills that you bring to the position. So look at the job posting and look at the skills they list there for the candidate they want, and mention those skills word for word, and talk about how you have those skills and how you would bring them to the position. Talk a little bit about why you want to work there specifically, what drew you to this job posting. And then this trick I almost always use in a cover letter. Go on the company's website and find their mission statement and quote it almost word for word. So you can say something like, I know that my experience with this and my skills of this and this will help the company's mission to do this. That shows that you did your research and you know what the company is about and you know how you can help them. And then you can finish up your cover letter with a call to action. You can keep it pretty simple. I usually just say something like, thank you very much for the consideration, and I look forward to hearing from you soon.
So after you've done your whole application, created your cover letter, you're probably going to be submitting a lot of these things online, typically through company job portals. And so I like to just keep a simple spreadsheet tracking all of my applications that have a date of the time that I saw the opportunity, the company that it was with, the job ID number, the job title, have an actual link to the website itself for where the job is listed in case they call you back and you want to refresh yourself on what the job it was that you applied for. List your usernames and passwords, and you can make those really simple, but I will tell you from experience, every company and job portal seems to have a different format for how they want their username and or their passwords. So it gets very confusing very quickly. I would list that in my spreadsheet. And then any other kinds of information like security question answers that you would have. Special tip, you do not have to answer the security questions accurately. I do not want a random company that I'm just applying for a job to know what my mother's maiden name is, for instance. So you can come up with random words and have them all the same and just have your security questions be random words. As long as you know what those answers are and you capture them, it's really easy to then go back into that job portal if and when you do get an interview to refresh yourself on the next steps for that position and get back into your account. So interviewing best practices. We are going to assume that all of you are going to get interviews because your cover letters and your resumes are going to be perfect and highlight how special you are for the position. So how do you prepare? Well, the basics, right? You need to be, presentable, dress professionally, have clean clothes, take a shower beforehand. Also logistics. How long is it going to take you to get to the interview site? Which we'll talk to you about virtual interviews in a moment. But if you have an opportunity to have a interview in person, then figuring out how you're going to get there, where to park, those kinds of things are going to help reduce your stress level when you're arriving on site. But basically what you want to do is you want to bring your best self. So you don't want to stress about how you're going to act or what you're going to say. Let your goofiness and awkwardness shine. They're hiring you and they're hiring this person for a specific role, and you don't want to try to present yourself as something that you're not. Certainly present the best self that you have and don't come in there, with a sort of lackadaisical attitude about the whole thing, but don't try too much to have the perfect answers at the perfect timing for all of the questions that they might have and try to twist yourself into a pretzel that you won't be able to sustain once you have the job. So relax, treat this as a conversation, not an interrogation, because you're also trying to learn more about them and their position as well to see if they meet your criteria. So as much as an interview feels like, oh, they're choosing me, you're also choosing them. So try to think of it more as a back and forth conversation than a test or an interrogation of the panel interviewing you and you having to come up with a perfect answer. That said, I like this little saying, be brief, be bright, be gone. We tend to get very nervous, and when we get nervous, we talk a lot and we kind of get ourselves lost in our stories. So listen to the questions that they're asking you. Take a beat to kind of think of an example or think of something that you want to say. It's okay to, take a second or two to formulate your thoughts. And then when you have your answer, make sure that it is brief, that you have it concisely answered the question that is being asked of you. Make it a really great answer, be sparkling and be personable about it when you're giving that answer, and then stop talking, because when you stop talking, you allow space for people to write notes about your answer and to queue it up for the next question as well. If you spend too long on any one particular answer, the interview committee can't get to all of their other questions, and also you seem as though you're not able to form a concise thought about your background. So practice some really softball questions in the mirror. Look up typical interview questions online so that you can get in the habit of practicing what those normal responses would be for you, so that you can go in super prepared for any interview questions that are thrown at you. And then of course the last obvious things are, maintain eye contact. If you're too distracted and you're looking up at walls or you're really shy, you're not really making that human connection. Again, we're talking about humans that are making very value-based choices a lot when they're on the other side of the desk. So make sure that your body language and that your eye contact are conveying interest in the person that is talking to you, and also interest in the job and the position that you're applying for.
So at the end of almost every interview, they will give you an opportunity to ask questions. And as Disco said, you are interviewing them too. So you should absolutely come prepared with questions for you to ask in the interview. When you're coming up with these questions beforehand, be genuinely curious about the position and the company and the work environment. You can Google questions to ask in a job interview and kind of use those as a starting point, but don't only ask those questions. Think critically about the position and the company and what your day-to-day would be like, and come up with actual questions. I will say about the work environment that it is okay for you to want the best for yourself and to advocate for yourself in these interviews. In my first real adult job, I was really spoiled and I had 2 huge windows all to myself, and I got really used to that. And then in my second real adult job, I went to a really dark, tiny office with 3 other people where there were no windows and no natural light. And that was really, really hard for me. And I realized that natural light was something that's important to me. So it's something that I ask about now in interviews. It may not be the make or break factor in whether or not I accept a job offer, but it is important to me and I still ask about it. And I think something that's especially timely right now is asking about the company's response to the pandemic that we're currently in. So questions like, what did you do to protect your employees in the pandemic? Did you have any long-term disaster planning in place? Was this disaster planning successful when the pandemic happened? Did you have to lay off any employees? And if so, what did you do to help your employees that were laid off? Questions like this are really going to inform how the company treats its employees and what they will do for their employees in times of crisis. It's very unlikely, knock on wood, that any of us are going to experience a global pandemic on this scale again in our lifetimes, but it will inform how the company is going to treat you day to day, as well as in times of big crisis like this. And then a good last question to ask is, what are the next steps? Because that's a great segue that kind of cues the hiring committee into the fact that you are done asking questions and you are ready to hear about what's next. Because it can be kind of awkward to just be like, I am done asking questions now. And it can be kind of weird to try to find a way to end that. And then I want to talk briefly about virtual interviews and the best practices for that, because I have a feeling virtual interviews are going to be the norm for a while. So you want to make sure that you have good lighting and a neutral background. I would recommend testing whatever software they're going to use with a friend beforehand. So if your virtual interview is over Skype, for example, then have a friend call you on Skype about 30 minutes ahead of time so you can make sure that your software works okay and get some jitters out. Dress for an in-person interview head to toe. Even though they probably won't see you from like the chest down, it'll trick your mind into like making you sit up a little straighter and making you act a little more formal, which will help. Minimize your distractions. So put your phone in airplane mode, find a quiet room. If you live with other people, ask them politely to like leave you alone for an hour or so. And then look at the webcam while you're talking, not the screen. So I am guilty of, whenever I'm in a video chat, always looking to the side to see how I look, as opposed to looking at the webcam. And when you look at the webcam, it makes the people you're chatting with feel like you're making eye contact, even though you can't see them. So that helps kind of like simulate the eye contact that you would want to do in an in-person interview. And then it's okay to use notes in a virtual interview, but just don't read off them verbatim, because it'll be really obvious that you're just reading something and it'll sound like really weird and forced. So this is an example of a bad virtual interview setup. You can see I'm in front of a window, but like the wrong way. So I'm super backlit. I'm wearing like an old t-shirt. My hair is a mess. There's a bunch of stuff in the background, like a person and plants, and it's just really distracting and like hard to see me. This is an example of a good virtual interview setup. I have a much more neutral background. There's still stuff going on, but it's way less distracting. I'm in front of the window facing the right way. I'm smiling, I'm wearing professional clothes, and I'm making eye contact with the webcam. So let's talk a little bit now about following up after an interview. So I would recommend following up by email as soon as you're done with the interview. You know, people used to say that you should send a handwritten thank you note to the people you interviewed with, which is very nice. And I used to do that when I was in high school, but it kind of takes it can take a few days to get there, and an email is instant. So these days I'd recommend an email. You should send an email definitely to the person who's been your main contact, whether that's like an HR person or the person who'd be your supervisor. And you should also send individual emails to all of the people who are on your hiring committee if you have their emails. If you don't have their email addresses, address them by name in the email to your main contact. So say something like, also please thank like Debbie, John, and Rachel for their time today. I really appreciated it. And then the post-interview email is also a great place to talk about anything that you didn't get to cover in your interview. So if you get out of your interview and you're like, oh, I just remembered this great volunteer experience I had that I didn't get to talk about, that's a great place to include that information. Following up after that, I would generally recommend giving like 3 or so days after the committee said they decide in order to follow up. So if you did your interview on Thursday and the hiring committee said they get back to you by Monday, I'd probably wait until like the next Thursday to email them and check in and mention that you're still interested in the position and you were wondering where they were in the process. And then if you get the call that you are not offered the position, they went with a different candidate, ask for feedback. That is a totally normal and professional and standard thing to do if you're not offered a job position. And in addition to it making you look really good, it can be really helpful to have that feedback for the next time you interview. And you know, they will probably remember you if they got to that point where they're giving you a personal phone call to tell you you didn't get the job. They'll probably remember you asking for feedback and showing that interest and taking an interest in your career if any other opportunities come up in the future that work for you. And last night when we did this presentation live, Catherine brought up a great point that a lot of times their first choice candidate might not work out in the first 30 days or so. Like something will come up or they'll realize it just wasn't the right fit. And they'll probably remember that you handled that rejection with a lot of grace and poise and you asked for feedback, and you might be the next person they call.
That was such a great point too, because that also, by the way, is building your network. I currently work for a boss right now that I did not, I actually declined the job. I had accepted another position from while I was in the hiring process or the interview process with this other job. Turns out 8 months later, that person who was the hiring manager of that position currently is now my boss in the position that I'm in right now, and he remembered me. And it's made the transition a lot easier. So you never know when an opportunity is gonna find itself back to you again. So I thought that was a great point. Okay, so real talk. You can do everything perfectly. All the stuff that Witch and I have shared with you, you can do it magically and wonderfully and still not get the job. And that's okay, because remember that a hiring committee is sifting through a ton of different applicants, and they're looking for the right position for them as well, right? They're looking for the right candidate that will fill their position and meet all of their needs. It doesn't mean that you've done anything wrong if you don't get the job. Just think of those interviews and all of that application as yet another point of practice, because we all need practice at this stuff. This stuff is going to be scary for you if you haven't been in the job market for a really long time. And I can tell you, like, the longer you're in the job market, the scarier it gets, because you start getting either silences, or you start getting notices saying that you have not been selected for positions, and it starts feeling kind of dready when you're in the process of it. So just remember that all of these things are just about practicing and refining your speech and refining your presentation and refining your interview skills, refining your cover letters and your documents and your resumes and stuff, because that's going to really help you. If you keep in mind that this is all just practice for the next thing that I will be able to find that I'm going to love, it will help keep your perspective a little bit more clear. But just remember, you can still do this, right? We're in the middle of a pandemic. Lots of people are laid off. The economy will open, hopefully sooner than later, but it will eventually open, and you'll have lots of opportunity to find something that you love, because everyone's going to be looking for jobs as well. So you can do this. Keep your spirits up, keep your confidence up, because you deserve a job that deserves you back. And I'll leave with this last quote. To get something you never had, you have to do something you've never done. And it's absolutely true with job hunting. If you have been one of the lucky ones in the past that apply to one job and get it, it makes you feel like you can get any job out there. It makes you feel super empowered. But the reality is that it's probably going to be a little bit of a challenge going forward. So you're going to have to step outside of that comfort zone and start stretching yourself and start growing in ways that you didn't think that you had to before, in order for you to get to a place that's just going to be much better for you. So with that, we're going to switch to the Q&A. We've got our contact information up here, including Witch's professional resume information, in case you are interested in getting in contact with her for help with your resume after this. And Catherine, did you want to tell us the questions that we had from last night so we can repeat those?
Yes, the first one I wanted to tackle was a skills-based resume. I had because I've worked a lot of gig work and creative jobs, and so has my partner Benjamin, when I was job hunting, I found it was easier to put together a skills-based resume to unify everything that I've done and to capture the major themes. How do you feel about that, Witch?
Yeah, that's okay. I think skills-based resumes are great if that's something that's applicable to your industry. Because especially if you do gig work, if you have done a lot of different things, we talked a little bit last night about like cohesion in a resume and how a lot of people have like different experiences that seem really all over the place. And if you're struggling to make your resume feel cohesive because you have done so many different things, a skills-based resume might be a great fit for you. I didn't have an example of a skills-based resume on this presentation, but you can Google them to see examples of them. They're a little bit different in the way you write them in the formatting, but it's definitely something to consider if you are familiar with a lot of gig work and a lot of varied job experience.
Cool. And then people were wondering about best practices for getting seen by the digital robots that may be reading through many resumes before they ever get to a human.
Yeah, so I can take that one because I have been kicked out of many a digital robot for not meeting the criteria or the expertise before it even gets to a human to evaluate my resume. So my recommendation for that is to pepper your resume and your cover letter with those keywords that you find in the job ad itself. So if your resume already doesn't have those industry specific keywords, you probably need to put them in. If this is a job that you really don't have a ton of quote unquote industry experience in, you probably just need to take those words verbatim and start layering them into your resume and creating a different resume for that job. I will tell you that I am not a huge fan of those robots because they kick a lot of really great candidates out. And I have been on the other side of that table as a hiring committee and a hiring manager, where I find out later that somebody who would have been a perfect fit for that job didn't get the opportunity to get to us because those robots filtered you out. So unfortunately, you got to contend with the robots, but the best way to get past that is if you know somebody in the company and you're able to find someone who can put your resume right on that hiring manager's desk for viewing. Because if they see it and you still haven't gotten through the filters, they'll still put you in the candidacy pool. And then they're able to do that. They can talk to their HR people and filter you into the candidacy. So that's where networking comes in. If you know people, the more people you know, or the more people who know the people that you need to get to, the better chance you have at getting your resume viewed by an actual human rather than having it sifted through a robot.
Cool. And then we had a question about design portfolios and keeping those up to date. Not job hunting and how daunting it can be for people in the creative industry to send out that work.
It's absolutely daunting. So yeah, we got this from a designer that works for RCR actually. How do you put together your portfolio and how do you keep that updated? I will say you put together your portfolio the same way that you put together your resume. You should not wait until you need a job in order to update your resume. So I'd say every 6 months or so, put it on your calendar that, oh, today is the day that I look at my portfolio and or my resume and make sure that it's up to date with my most current skills. Because a lot of us will get in a job, and even, for us that aren't in creative endeavors, we'll get in a job and we'll wait until we've been, a year or two past and have, some sort of job insecurity facing us before we update our resume. And in that year and a half, you've done a ton of stuff. And now you've got to really think about what you want to put in and how you want to craft it. So much easier if you can do that in pieces. So if you're a designer, same thing I would recommend is that make sure your portfolio is up to date and accurate with the things that you really love. The other thing is we talked last night about the difference between a generalist and a specialist, because one of the sub questions for that was, what if I'm, encountering a position online that says that there's already been 400 applicants for it? Well, first of all, don't get intimidated by the number of people who have applied, because we know a lot of people apply for jobs that have no, experience or intention of getting that job. They're just kind of like applying for jobs to get the, practice of applying for jobs. A lot of times too, those jobs might be, you want to look and see those ones that look like they have a high applicant count, because, you can see them, on the application that you're applying to, or applying in rather. Look and see what time that or what date that job was posted at, because if you're seeing something with 2 or 3 or 400 applicants, that job probably has been out there for a very long time, which gives me an indication that they're not very interested in hiring for that position anytime soon. So, certainly apply for it if you're interested in it, but it's one of those, don't get too wrapped up or too married to the prospect of getting hired or getting recognized in there, because it, sometimes that means that they're just not super interested in hiring somebody right away. So that difference also between, I was getting back to the difference between a generalist and a specialist. Generalist jobs will be pretty much open for everybody, and you'll want to have your resume crafted to look like you can do just about anything. But you're going to be competing with a lot more humans when you look more like a generalist. You'll be competing with a lot fewer people if you look like a specialist. Now, you're also going to be confronting not a lot of job advertisements for specialist jobs. So the number of those specialist jobs will be fewer, but the number of applicants for those specialist jobs will also be fewer. So if you are in the position of being able to craft either, being a specialist or being a generalist, you might want to think about dividing your applications or your resume or your portfolio into 2 pieces. So you've got a generalist and a specialist application ready to go for either of those jobs that you encounter.
I would also recommend, especially if you're in some kind of design or artistic field, make your resume part of your portfolio. Like, design your resume to look really good and to be eye-catching. It doesn't, as opposed to just using like a Microsoft Word template, because that's the first thing that they're going to see, and that'll really help you stand out.
100%.
That's great advice, you guys. Thank you so much for re-recording this.
Yes.
Very
thank
much
you.
appreciated. I will have this up on YouTube by the end of the day.
Awesome.
Great.
Thanks, Catherine.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Catherine.
Bye.
Bye.